Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, it's my pleasure to be here for what I understand is the 20th year that this conference is happening and the 25th year of mobile telephony in Greece. Thank you so much for having me here, Mr. Nosti and his team. I'm going to talk in brief about mobile telephony, but more broadly, digitization. So let's start with some memories. All of us remember these, right? 25 years of mobile telephony. I remember the first time I saw a mobile telephone. It was with a friend of mine who was carrying something that was almost as big as a suitcase, right? And you had to take it out and plug it in and the rest. And I don't know about you, but my kids these days don't recognize the old telephones. You know, when they were young, I used to show them these books with words in it. And when you saw telephone and they saw the old Bakelite telephones, very few of them actually recognized anything other than a mobile phone as a telephone. So the world has come a long way. 25 years in, we take mobile phones for granted. And I think mobile phones have changed our individual lives. And they've changed them all for the better. But what I want to talk about a bit today is the broader picture of not just mobile phones, but digitization, and how digitization, I believe, is not just changing individuals' lives, but is changing society as a whole. And how, like I think a few people talked about earlier, how when the industry and governments get together, you can actually see societies change. And I want to spend some time talking about specific examples of how countries across the world are using digital transformation to change the nature of their societies. And in my mind, therefore, the opportunity that stands in front of Greece to really use this technology to transform society, not just the lives of individuals, but society as a whole. Let's start with some examples of countries that are doing this and what has enabled them to do that. Start with South Korea on infrastructure. South Korea today has 85,000 mobile sites for a country with a population of 50 million. That's broadly 4 times the number of sites that Greece has for each individual operator, order of magnitude. Why does that happen, right? And what does that result in? That happens because spectrum in South Korea is actually really cheap. What does that result in? Mobile operators spend more on coverage and towers than they do on actually buying the spectrum. That's fundamentally a trade-off that the government and that society is making, which is they're not going to use mobile telephony as a source of immediate tax revenue, but they're going to use it as a source of competitive advantage to compete with other countries on infrastructure. 70% of South Korea has fiber. Why does that happen? Because the rights of way in South Korea and the taxes around laying fiber are the lowest anywhere in the world. What does that result in? Gigabit coverage to pretty much every business in South Korea. Now, why does the South Korean government and why does South Korean society get behind building digital infrastructure? Because they fundamentally believe that for many years they've competed on cheap labor, and the time has come to move beyond competing on cheap labor and begin competing based on R&D, begin competing based on autonomous factories, begin competing based on robotization, and begin competing on things other than cheap labor. And when you begin competing on these things, the first thing you need is a great broadband infrastructure. And what I'm presenting to you is a fundamental trade-off that a country and a society has made in terms of the position it wants our industry to play. And the results of that are a hyper-competitive economy and a society where 100 megabits is taken for granted, where gigabit access to technology has changed the nature of how it competes. Let me give you another example, right? This is the tiny country of Estonia. Estonia today has, what, 1.2 million people, order of magnitude, yet it has completely digitized its entire government through a real focus on 2 things, on high-speed connectivity, and with the government investing in large-scale ICT to make that happen. What are the implications of that? In the next few years, Estonia wants its e-resident scheme to have as many people as the entire population of Greece. Right? What is the e-resident scheme? Essentially, you can become an e-resident. So you can live wherever you want to in the world and become an e-resident of Estonia, which is almost a virtual citizen, open a business with all the rights that opening a business in the EU has, right? File your taxes, do everything completely online without ever having visited Estonia. So you can live your life as an e-resident of Estonia, run your business as an e-resident, and never have been there. Now, what that's doing is fundamentally changing Estonia's ability to attract startups, right? Again, a country which has chosen to use digital as a way of competing, has chosen to use its funds on deploying infrastructure, on building ICT, rather than on taxation, and has chosen to therefore reposition the way it competes in the world. I give you a third example. Now, we have some pretty large investments here, so I go to Israel reasonably often. Israel, as you know, is called the startup nation, has huge investments in startups, but also has amongst the most advanced e-medicine systems. Now, I know Greece has a relatively advanced prescription system, but where Israel is different is they use the data from all of their medical systems to actually mine it using big data and create sophisticated analytics that allow you preventive medication, that allow you the ability to understand what risks different people go through, and with time, bring down their health bill. Now, where does a lot of this come from? Again, decisions that the Israeli government made to invest in the startup ecosystem, decisions that they made to link a lot that happens within the Israeli military to drive R&D. But the point I'm making remains simple, which is choices that a government makes on how it works with the digital industry today are no longer about whether we as an industry make more money or not. They're about how people live their lives and how societies change. Because Israel today has the highest number of startups per capita. You have businesses like Mobileye, which was recently bought out for 11 billion by Intel. You have a society that is creating wealth through being the startup nation, fundamentally through changing the policy that it adopts towards the digital sector. And let me come up with my last example, China. Now, I find it quite amusing. I was in China about 3 weeks ago. In Europe, there's a lot of conversation amongst the regulators on what is the magic number. Should we have 3 operators or 4? In China, where they have really 2.5 operators, the conversation is, should we go to 2 operators or 1? Because you need scale for 5G, right? Now, China is doing something else, which is they're increasingly pivoting their entire policy in 2 directions. One is 5G, where they're looking at creating scale mobile operators who will be able to create autonomous driving, who will be able to create things like making sure that you have low latency factories, ensuring that robots and their use in autonomous factories enables China to no longer be a low-cost manufacturing location because of human cost, but to be low cost because of the level of automation. But the other fascinating thing that they're doing is the use of AI. The Chinese government plans to invest greater than 130 billion in the next 10 years in artificial intelligence. They already have stuff that Alibaba has built, for example, called the smart brain, which allows you, using AI, to effectively pretty much run a city, from everything from controlling traffic lights to the more scary elements like facial recognition, and therefore being able to track where different people are in the city. right? But whether you like that or not, the reality is the ability exists today. And again, here's an example of another country where they are pivoting their policy towards the digital industry as a whole, both in terms of telco players, but also broader R&D and broader investments on skill sets in AI, which is changing the way they will compete as a country. So when you look at all of this, I think we as a digital industry are moving from being a really interesting source of entertainment, from the days when we used to play Snake on our Nokia handsets. I don't know how many of you remember that. Unfortunately, I'm old enough to a place where, as an industry, it's not a question of entertainment. It's not a question of being available so that you can do cool stuff like watch cats on YouTube. But it's a question of survival of the economy. It's a question of how that country is able to compete. Because when you look at the examples of whether it's big countries like China or South Korea, or really small countries like Israel and Estonia, governments across the world are really beginning to see the power of how digital changes the lives of their people and how they can use it as a positive source for progress. And our ambition at Deutsche Telekom is completely aligned with this. We would like to be, we are today Europe's largest telco and Europe's leading telco. We would like to build on this, to be the leader in customer experience, to lead in technology, to lead in business productivity, to simplify, digitize, and accelerate, and really work with the governments and the societies in our region to use digital as a fundamental force for transforming their societies and their economies. And really the message for me from a Greek perspective is, I think where we are in Greece is at an exciting stage. We're at the beginning of a large-scale fiber rollout. We're beginning to see the power of digital, not just in terms of fiber and mobile networks, but also in terms of ICT and the things that it can do in terms of e-government. We would love to work with Greek society and Greek government to really take this forward so that in 5 years from now, hopefully, I can stand at the 25th anniversary of this conference and use Greece as one of the examples of a country that has truly used digital to transform the lives of its society. Thank you very much. Thank you.